Hello, everybody. My name is Rainer Micheli. I'm the director of the Institute for Competitive Intelligence, and it's my pleasure today to welcome you to our webinar about strategic foresight, how to achieve a forward-looking perspective. This sounds pretty interesting, doesn't it? So I hope you have a wonderful webinar today. Our speaker of the day, that's Yvette Montero Salvatico. So Yvette, are you on? Now I would love to hear your voice. So I assume, let me just see. Now try again. So Yvette,
Hi, Rainer. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Yes, that was just your microphone still
Wonderful.
muted.
Okay,
Sorry about
perfect.
that.
No, that's okay.
So we're live, as everybody can realize by now. So sorry about this little initial blunder. Yeah, the Institute for Competitive Intelligence, that's about education, certification in competitive/market intelligence. So we're always looking for new ideas, developments in the fields, trends, new tools, techniques, and the likes. One reason why we have our annual conference. And guess what? Last year, 2016, I had one speaker, and this was exactly Yvette. And I was very impressed by her presentation, her topic, and of course, a good reason to invite her for our webinar today. Yvette, it's, by the way, a Cuban name, so that's why I had a bit of a problem to pronounce it correctly. I'm sure you can do it much better than I can do. She's in consulting industry by now, after having spent several years with Walt Disney. So I'm sure a company that everybody knows, and if time permits, we'll talk about that as well. But these days, she's with Catch, a consultancy in the US, in the United States of America, of course, within the topic of strategic foresight. So we have a real expert in our midst, so to say, and we're expecting, of course, now to hear from you wonderful new stuff or the kind of how can we move from here to the future. The Institute for Competitive Intelligence, I mentioned that already, we have a series of webinars. This is in a way the second part of a trilogy of webinars talking about the future. So last time, 14 days ago, we were talking about toolbox for CI analysts, where the speaker, a guy from the Netherlands, described the way he built a toolbox around his, so to say, day-to-day work, surviving as a CI practitioner. In 14 days, we'll talk about scenarios as another way to get into the future. But today we focus on how can we get this perspective around futurism and future insight. So, Yvette, would you now like to present your slides? This should take us about 25-30 minutes, and then we have some question and answers for you to make sure that everybody can contribute. Please use the chat box. There's a little window, a chat window on your GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to post questions, and once we're done with the slides, or in between even, we can read them out loud, these questions. I'll do that, and then Yvette, you are please going to answer them. How does it sound?
Sounds excellent to me.
Okay, so it's all yours, please.
Excellent. So I was honored, as Rainer mentioned, to serve as a speaker at the conference last year, and we're scheduled to present again in May of this year, both a masterclass, a workshop, and a session during the conference. So hopefully some of you will be able to attend and will be able to meet in person, because I so appreciate that opportunity to a face-to-face presentation with colleagues and new friends in Europe, so and globally. So as Rainer mentioned, my journey into strategic foresight started at the Walt Disney Company. And we've had, the honor to continue to work with Disney after I left the company about 5 years ago. I joke that I work more for Disney now than when I worked for Disney 5 years ago. And we've had the privilege of training, just as an example, over 500 leaders from across the globe in regions including Europe, as well as Asia, and of course the US and Latin America. And one of the stopping points for strategic foresight, which I'll explain later, really is a field that is applicable and a skill that's really applicable across many fields, including the field of market and competitive intelligence. One of the major hurdles that we find is that we don't really have this intuitive sense about looking to the future, and we have organizations that by definition do not wish to look really into the future. So as you're preparing your competitive and market intelligence, as you're doing your work, I'm sure many, if not all of you, have experienced at some point the frustration of having your efforts not gain traction because of our inability to have a long-term perspective. So what I've put together today is a few slides to acknowledge and to decipher why so many forward-looking functions in our organizations fail. And these forward-looking functions could be strategy functions, it could be competitive intelligence functions, it could be foresight functions. So let's dive in quickly and just state the obvious, that we've entered a new era of business and really society, yet we're still relying on old methodologies, what we consider to be industrial age relics. They're all around us, our education system, our political system, which I won't dive into today, but as you can imagine, the environment here in the US right now is like no other we've ever experienced. And I would argue, and many of my peers would argue, that the reason that we find ourselves in the situation that we find ourselves politically here in the US is because there are many, many of our citizens that have been left behind, meaning there has been this incredible amount of change, new technologies, new social movements, environmental change, and yet we haven't equipped our citizens, our students, our educators, our professionals with the ability to make sense of the changes and be agile. So it's critical. We've entered what many are calling the post-normal world or society, which I like this term because it really, centers on the fact that we're not back where we were, we're not yet where we're going, but the fact is that this idea of normal, in air quotes, is not coming back. And we have to accept that and develop new mindsets to deal with this new normal. So the first reason why I believe many forward-looking functions fail is because they tend to have a risk management charter. I'm very, very aware of the fact that we must seek out and track threats and risks. However, when your forward-looking function, when your role is centered around solely this and primarily risk management or threat assessment, it doesn't work in the long term. For far too long, we have focused on building up firewalls and trying to prevent threats from entering. And what that ultimately does is leave us more brittle and less able to deal with things that do make it through, which we know ultimately things will make it through that firewall. The best sort of example or illustration I have of this is a study that was done not that long ago about children. You might be asking yourself, what does a study about children and specifically playgrounds have to do with risk and resiliency? Well, let me explain. They did a study that showed that we've made our playgrounds far too safe in the US. We've engineered our playgrounds to ensure that children never get hurt, do not fall from high places, and as a result, we've attempted to insulate our children from failure. And the result is that we have now children that have grown in these environments that are artificially insulated. And when they do fail, which of course they will, they are unable to cope with the ramifications of that failure. So in fact, like our playgrounds, we need to create an environment within our organizations that we can fail in a safe way. We can use things to test out possible outcomes, but then we can also look at the opportunity lever as well. So not just threat assessment, but also opportunities. I have here an illustration that's center to strategic foresight, which is this notion of the push and the pull of the future. So the future exists on a spectrum. Most organizations and individuals focus solely on the push of the future. And it's important, right? It's the trends and changing technology and social value shifts that no matter what we do will push us to the future, whether we like it or not. So the push of the future is always bombarding us with new things and really demanding our attention. Unfortunately, that usually means that we ignore the other side of the spectrum, which is the pull of the future. The pull of the future are those aspirations, those visions of preferred futures that we should not lose sight of. In fact, not only can we pull ourselves to those preferred futures, by doing strategic foresight, by working with competitive intelligence and trend analysis, we can actually pull that future to today. So it's a balancing act between both of these ends of the spectrum, the push and the pull. And so we have to work on risk and threat assessment, but also on the aspirations component. So the second reason why so many forward-looking functions fail is that they stop at the tip of the iceberg. What do I mean by this? We love to create reports, whether they be trend reports or consumer or competitive insights and forecasts. And this is really the level of soil testing and crop diversity, if I could use that analogy. Of course, it's critically important for us to ensure that our soil is healthy, so we have to make sure that we have very robust trend, consumer insights, and behavior analysis. And of course, we also have to make sure that we're planting crop diversity, that we're ensuring that industry realm, we're aware of those signals of change and those competitors. But most organizations stop there at that level, and they miss the third and often more important level, especially in this environment, which is the topography, that 30,000 foot level, where we're able to see the external driving forces, those patterns of change, and the emerging alternatives. So I would, my premise would be that your competitive intelligence, your market intelligence will be amplified if you can also include those opportunities and threats that emerge from outside your industry. And I would further theorize that in this environment of volatile change, your opportunities, your organization's opportunities, and the future disruptors are much more likely to come from outside your industry than from within it. In fact, even the term industry is very much a relic of a previous era. There are 35 companies currently pursuing the driverless vehicle. Only 3 are considered automotive companies. The other 32 are not. So what does the term industry even mean? We have to broaden our perspective. And we also have to think about something beyond trends. So we talk about this in terms of futures intelligence. And it acknowledges that trends are important, but trends by definition are the present. So we must also look at what causes the trends to begin with, those value shifts, as well as the impact and implications of those trends on our organizations, on our society, on the economy. So let me start by saying that trends are not created in a petri dish in a laboratory, right? They are created because there are value shifts in society that drive those signals, that drive this change in society. So we have to be aware of the first and foremost, the value shift. So your competitive and market intelligence, your future-focused efforts must include analysis of values. Secondly, when we think about implications, we have to recognize that trends don't exist in isolation. In fact, they collide. So trends in society impact those in technology, impact those in policy, and it's not just those that are in your industry, but those that are in that broader macro environment. It is through understanding the collision of these trends that we get to see the patterns that are emerging. In other words, if you look into the night sky, the stars are the trends. as you become a better futurist and pattern and sense maker, you can see the constellations. You can actually see what's emerging next, which is much more critical than just focusing on the tip of the iceberg or the trend. Third reason, why do so many forward-looking functions fail? They often operate as closed systems in isolation from the rest of the organization, in a silo, if you will. This is dangerous. So many organizations I know, including Disney, have fallen into this trap of dedicating resources, which it sounds like a great idea to dedicate resources to a focused effort on the future, on competitive intelligence, on market intelligence. However, what tends to happen is these things end up losing funding, and you lose the function. Instead, we need to consider these foresight efforts, these future-focused efforts like market intelligence and competitive intelligence, like your operating system, not like an app. Right? We have to think about them as running in the background of our organizations, and that's a significant change from current mindsets. If not, your insulated division will probably fall into the trap of executive entertainment, meaning you are preparing information reports that simply confirms what your leadership knows to be true instead of challenging their perspective. If you challenge too much in an insulated department, you lose funding. So it's important that we challenge ourselves to drive this insight into the organization and not keep it insulated. Another way to think about this is when you sequester foresight and competitive intelligence efforts to just one part of the organization, you ignore the fact that this is really about culture development. And if you don't have the culture to support your insights, that culture is going to serve as a roadblock. You can have the most incredible insights about your competition and about the future, but if you haven't done the work to make the organization ready to hear and see those insights, you're not going to get very far. And we have to remember that although we love to benchmark against companies like Google, and we run and we put a ball pit in because I think we think that's going to make us more innovative, that culture cannot be copied or benchmarked or Googled, pun intended, but it can be developed. And in fact, using strategic foresight and these processes and mindsets as an integrated philosophy running in the background of not only innovation and strategy, but leadership and executive development, that's going to make you successful in the longer term. That's going to make your executives ready to hear the intelligence and the insights that you're providing. It doesn't happen overnight, and I would challenge you to reach out to other parts of the organization that you may not at first think would be good partners. Groups like HR and the org development group. Those groups are supposed to be equipping the organization to deal with the future and deal with change, which is exactly what many of your insights suggest is coming. So work in partnership with some of these organizations. Don't remain insulated. The last reason why so many forward-looking functions fail is they focus too much on the future, which sounds like a ridiculous statement, but let me explain why this can pose a problem. We know that in the environment we're in, a quarterly deadline and quarterly results always takes precedence over thinking about the future. We often lose support, funding, and headcount because our organization fails to see the connection between the future and today. So your role as market and competitive intelligence leaders and strategy leaders is to help your organization understand the strong connection between the future and today so that they value your insights as just as critical as the quarterly deadline that they're facing. The first concept here to realize is that the future is not a time, it's a place. It's just as valid a place as the present and the past. And when we change our perspective on the way that the future is a place and not a time, it helps us to see that we can colonize or decolonize the future, that we should think of the future as a place where there'll be people and hopefully trees. When we change our relationship with the future, it helps us make these better decisions in the present. In fact, there are many organizations we counsel when they're launching a foresight effort or a futures effort not to call it Consumer 2030, not to label a year with the work, because those things always, seem to create a mile marker in people's minds of when this is going to occur, and then it loses priority against current quarter deliverables. So the future is not a time but a place, and when we are asking our organization have a new vision, it requires a new measurement. We love this concept of the long now, and of course there's the long now foundation. The term now can mean many things. I want a hamburger now. Clearly designates that, within the next few minutes I'd like to have a hamburger. But if I say women in business now are, taking the lead on many management efforts, that's sort of a longer time period, and I can go on from there. So our relationship with the word now, the concept of immediacy, is shifting, and if we can encourage our organization to have a long now mindset as opposed to just the now, that will help our efforts considerably. Ultimately, the main idea you need to get across to your leadership about the imperative of the future is this concept. The future is actually not about the future. The future is about today. Because how we think about the future directly impacts the decisions we make today. So when you're able to make the link between the future and today, and help people to understand that it's just as much a priority as their decisions are, it's critically important. In fact, when we're lacking a narrative about the future, we wonder, what type of decisions are our leaders making? Probably not very good ones. So the future is not about the future is about today. If I could ask, if I have some background noise, if everyone is not muted, could you mute your line just to ensure that everyone has a quality experience with the webinar? Thank you.
Just everybody's muted, but there might be some guys over the telephone. So please be careful. Nobody's talking in the back of your telephone. Okay.
Thank you so much. So these are the reasons why we have found more than likely that future-focused efforts fail. And it's important to note those, and I've given you hopefully some timely and practical advice about how to approach these efforts within your organization. However, I want to take a step back now and recognize that not all of us have the ability to influence the organizational structure of our companies. And as a result, I think it's important to recognize that we need to begin with ourselves. So I travel extensively for my work, and I spend a lot of time on airplanes. One of the things in the safety brief that everyone probably remembers hearing is that we need to put our oxygen mask on before helping others. So in this section, I wanted to talk about what we can begin doing as competitive intelligence and market intelligence leaders to develop our mindset, our futurist mindset, because this is the type of thinker we need in our organization. So before attempting to help others, let me talk about what makes up the futurist mindset before we open it up for questions in just a few minutes. So there are 3 elements to the futurist mindset: sense, mesh, and transform. Let me go through each one and give you a specific case study that demonstrates this mindset in practice. The first is sense. So when I talk about sense, I'm talking about transcending trends and picking up on patterns. Very similar to what I shared earlier, in that we don't want to focus on the isolated trends or the stars in the night sky. We need to make sense of what's occurring and see what's happening as a result of the collision of those trends. Nothing exists in isolation in our current environment, and in order to move past today, you need to see what the patterns are. Trends, by definition, are the present. You can see them. They're today. To really get ahead of the market and be a market leader, you have to study the collision of the trends to see those patterns. Now, this is a highly qualitative approach, and somewhere along the way, the word qualitative became a bad word over the more preferred quantitative. Now, Foresight uses both quant and qual, But I want to share with you the fact that once you have data on a particular topic, it's no longer the future, it's the past. By definition, it's already occurred. That's why you have data on it. So I want to acknowledge first, having been in finance and strategy with Disney for over 10 years of my 13-year tenure, that I recognize the importance of data-driven approaches. I did a fair number of 5-year plans with that organization, so I understand the power of that process. However, what I've found since is that psychologists have done many studies, and they have discovered a very interesting fact about us as humans. They have discovered that our reaction to uncertainty as human beings is physical nausea, meaning we want to vomit when we're faced with uncertainty. So that's not very good for a futurist or a competitive intelligence or market intelligence professional. So because of that, this is why data-driven approaches in Excel and traditional 5-year and 3-year plans are so popular, because they, like this slide demonstrates, become a worn and familiar blanket that makes us feel more comfortable when things are changing around us. But we know from history and from our ongoing work that as soon as we set those plans, those quantitative plans, they're wrong. There's no way that we can predict the future, because the future cannot be predicted. The future can be mapped. And so as a futurist, we have to get comfortable with qualitative approaches. As market and competitive intelligence leaders, we have to be comfortable with the qualitative as well. The good news is that our brains are actually geared to recognize patterns. We do it better than computers. This has been shown in studies as well. So we have to be comfortable with that space where the answer is not going to be able to be put into an Excel spreadsheet to generate a formula. And in fact, using data, both quant and qual, is the only way that we're going to be able to plot our path to the future successfully. An example of this is work that we did with Daimler Automotive, specifically their North American trucks division. They were the first to develop the semi-truck, the long-haul truck that was driverless. And what we did was work with them to strengthen their already strong trend and market analysis group and competitive and innovation group by adding the concept of values, by recognizing that these trends and these ideas, like the driverless semi-truck, don't just get created in a laboratory. They have impacts and implications on values, and they are birthed from value shifts. So by adding this additional layer, the human context, to their technological innovation, they were able to better determine what was next for their innovation and for their product development efforts. So they analyzed both the values causing the new trends that they were following, as well as the value shifts that would result from the implementation of their major innovations. So it was very important to them. So sense was first. We need to make sense of the trends, understand the patterns, and understand the values that are undergirding them. And then we want to mesh. We want to shake up those silos and surface sweet spots. Spoke about this briefly as it relates to your foresight efforts or your competitive intelligence efforts, but this goes way beyond that. This is about collaborating beyond our discipline, beyond our department, beyond our function. I share with folks that many do not know that, at least in the US, many of our organizational constructs are based off of Henry Ford and the assembly line. And of course, that was an incredibly monumental innovation to develop the assembly line. It helped with efficiency, and it really brought about most of all of the innovations coming out of that manufacturing era. Many do not know, however, that what inspired Henry Ford's assembly line before he built the first one was he benchmarked the slaughterhouse. And in the specialization of tasks is where he got his inspiration for his assembly line methodology. So as you can see, taking it a step further, many of our organizational structures, everything from org charts, from the fact that we're specialized in departments, not only come from the assembly line, which is already outdated, but take it a step further, they really were birthed from the old-fashioned slaughterhouse, which, of course, our environment is much different than that of a slaughterhouse. So we're seeing organizations and educational institutions adapt a meshing mindset, understanding that it's in the spaces in between disciplines that we see the new opportunities and areas for solutions. So many organizations and many educational institutions are creating whole new ways of viewing the traditional discipline and really mixing traditional disciplines together to create a post-disciplinary world. We worked with the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada and help them to understand, and they are truly a transformational group. Many people hear accountants and they think that they would be, sort of very quant-based and very black and white, but actually their leadership is very progressive. And in working with them, they identified many spaces where it was critically important to break down silos and specifically help their network to redefine what it was to be a professional accountant in the new world, because traditional accountancy is probably not going to be needed the way that we think of it today. And so they really broke down barriers between their profession and other professions. Canada is on the forefront of technology like blockchain, and really understanding that all of these things that we've tended to separate and segregate will no longer continue to act that way, and so we have to have a much more meshed perspective. Okay, last but not least, before we transition into questions, is the third futurist mindset. So first we had sense, which was looking past individual trends to understand the patterns that are forming. Then we had mesh, which is breaking through our traditional silos to collaborate across disciplines to find solutions to our long-standing problems. Last but not least, certainly, is transform, the idea that we have to ditch disruption and build breakthrough. So, of course, disruption is a current buzzword. And it's disrupt or be disrupted. We really believe that transformation is actually what we should be seeking. So rather than incremental innovation, making the screen a little bit bigger or changing the color, those that want to continue to exist in the future will need to understand how to transform their organization. And of course, here we have a quote from Larry Page of Google, who, by all probably most definitions, is a transformative organization. They say companies are doing the same incremental thing they did 50 years ago, 20 years ago. The main thing that has caused companies to fail, in my view, is that they missed the future because they're thinking incrementally. Google, of course, is now Alphabet, and is really exploring everything from, artificial intelligence to smart home technology. It's hard to remember that they were originally a search engine company. And what these three examples have in common, Google, Nike, and Fujifilm, is that these are organizations that looked at their DNA, looked at what it was at the core of what makes them who they are. And instead of thinking about how to just incrementally make that better, they thought about what is our higher order purpose? What are we meant to be as we transform? Very similar to the fact that the acorn has the same core DNA as the mighty oak tree that grows from it, yet they're very different form factors. So if today you're the acorn or you're the seed, what are you meant to transform to become? In the case of Nike, they could have continued to be a shoe company and just, tried to think about how to make the shoe lighter, or how to make the shoe a different color, but they realized that there was only so much market opportunity in that strategy. So instead they, established the Fitbit, and while that might not be a major focus, ultimately they see themselves as a quantified self organization, an organization that is focused on everyone being an athlete and everybody being able to track their progress and ensure that they're at their prime performance. And then last but not least, Fujifilm, which, around the same time as Kodak, went down a very different path. They also saw, like Kodak, that traditional film canisters were not going to be relevant for too much longer. Kodak, if you're not familiar, actually bought an online digital photo sharing site many, many years ago called oPhoto. And instead of seeing that as a platform for potentially digital photo sharing and sharing memories, they instead installed kiosks and tried to get people to print their pictures from their online repository. Fuji, on the other hand, pivoted towards the medical field, used their film technology to develop more robust medical x-rays, and now Fujifilm has transformed into the leader of regenerative medicine. They found that the molecular and cellular behavior of their film technology lended beautifully to advancements and innovations around cellular regeneration and regenerative medicine. So the tale of two organizations there with Fujifilm and Kodak. Again, these are meant to demonstrate the idea of transformation. This brings me to my work with the Disney company. Again, in just a minute, we'll open it up to questions. So if you've thought of any, please use your chat function to share those. So at Disney specifically and Walt Disney International, we led an effort to create a culture of future thinkers. We've trained over 500 leaders across the globe in areas like Mexico, Australia, Russia, and of course, Europe and Latin America. And we've not only trained foresight practitioners, we've created a movement. And we've trained advanced practitioners who have now continued to move the work forward. They have influenced the way strategy is developed within Disney. In fact, the team in Russia completely changed the 5-year plan process to include scenarios, the topic of your webinar in a couple of weeks. So this is really 30 case studies in one, but really showcases the transformative impact of using long-term thinking within organizations and treating it like the operating system, as I mentioned. So before I open it up to questions, I just wanted to share, many people ask me, what are some things that I can start doing right away? Of course, all of you are professionals in the field, so I'm sure you have many ways that you can begin applying some of this thinking. But at a very base level, if you wanted to share this with others that you're trying to convert, here are 4 very basic ways that you can begin thinking like a futurist. The first is challenge your assumptions and old ways of thinking. If you think an idea is ridiculous, ask yourself why. This is critically important. Google has done a fair amount of research in this realm and has estimated that 99.99996% 99.99996% of the data we process unconsciously. That means we're relying on our existing mental models to determine whether a new piece of data is relevant or not. And as you know, in this environment of volatility and incredible change, that's a death sentence. So we need to pause and challenge our thinking so we're not relying on our unconscious mental models to determine the importance of a new piece of information. Start from the outside in. Okay, so whether you're a member of Twitter or not, it's not as important. Twitter is a great way to start scanning if you're not already doing so. The idea here is to start from outside your industry, not just within your industry. You should be scanning broadly around social, technological, environmental, economic, and political drivers. Trends that today may not seem important to your industry, but if you analyze the value shifts, if you look at the impacts and implications, and you study the collision of those trends, you'll see that they're going to be impactful. So start from the outside and work your way in. The third is to think in simultaneous multiples. Whether you engage in scenario planning or not, at least move past just the linear 5-year plan. You can use the 5-year plan, but also sketch out 3 or more divergent stories about the potential futures, informed by your trend and pattern research, and help them to, use them to help others suspend disbelief and transport themselves into the future to find new opportunities and potential threats. And last but not least, please don't focus just on the trends and emerging issues. Of course, those are critical, but those are a given. We have to also realize and think about where we want to head as an individual and as an organization. What vision or what aspiration do you have that you would like to pull your organization to, or more importantly, pull those futures to today? So with that, that concludes my slides. So I'm going to see if Rainer has any questions for me.
Well, thank you very much, Yvette. This was pretty much provocative, your statement, and I'm sure many people enjoyed that very much. So yes, please use your chat window and ask questions. We have several already in the pipeline. Remember at the beginning you made a reference to a study on children and playgrounds, and there was one request if you could share that study with us, Yvette.
I can absolutely send that to you, Rainer, and then you could send it out to those that were on the thing. I'm happy to.
Yeah, so this might be quite interesting. I like the idea, by the way, to have some some space where we can try out, experience some risk and failure, and then, of course, in the end, you learn a bit about how does it work in real life.
Yeah. I mean, it's why scenarios are so critical, and I think scenarios it'll be interesting to hear your webinar in a couple of weeks, that scenarios often get a bad reputation because they can take a lot of resources. Now, we've discovered ways to make scenarios a lot more accessible, but as you know, Royal Dutch Shell, the Shell organization, credits scenarios with propelling themselves really to the top of the industry during the oil crisis of the 1970s, and largely because they were able to test those possible outcomes. Not exactly what happened, but certainly enough to where their leadership wasn't caught unawares when things started to change. And as you probably know, Shell has done extensive work in scenarios. In fact, they have videos that showcase some of the past scenario work and how specifically it has led the organization to make different decisions. So if anyone on the webinar wants to learn more about that aspect, feel free to go to the website, Shell's website. They publish all of their scenarios, and there's some great resources there as well.
I think it would be useful if you could spell the name.
Yeah, so it's the oil company, Shell.
Oh, Shells. Okay,
yes.
now I understand.
So it's the official name was Royal Dutch Shell, but yes, it's known as Shell Oil.
Good. No, that's a useful look certainly into the world of scenario management. And one guy has actually published a book where he described the Shell methodology of developing scenarios. I've forgotten the name, but it's a famous author. Yep, then we had another question which was about trends. You might recall that's been slide number 19. I'm not sure whether you can jump back.
Yes, of course.
Further. Where we introduced this notion of trends and how they change the values. Remember that?
Yes.
This sort of stops up our too far. And now back the next one, please. Yeah, I think this was the one.
Yes.
And the question was, are the trends changing the values, or are the values creating the trends?
Absolutely both. So I can send out as well an infographic that we have created that demonstrates the life cycle of a trend. And the fact of the matter is that it's a cycle. It's not linear. So both questions are the answers are yes. So absolutely, value shifts create new trends in that people produce different behaviors. And so that produces trends, and then trends and new technological advancements as well as demographic changes influence values. A great example of that, a very, very poignant example of that, is this idea of digital values. So as we're spending more and more time in online communities, especially those younger people. I have a 20-year-old and a 10-year-old, and the 10-year-old is attached to her many screens, and whether it's the iPad or the phone. And so what's happening is these individuals that are spending more and more time on online communities are developing whole new values and value systems. And those values aren't staying in the online community. When those people disconnect and go out into the quote-unquote real world, because I would argue the virtual world is just as real as the physical world, but when they go out into the physical world, they take those values with them. And so, of course, we're seeing major value shifts because people are connecting across the globe, but trends themselves also create ripple effects that impact values. So absolutely yes to both of those.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And the next question. How do you build with your customers the balance between short results orientation and the action for the future digital changing?
Yes. These ideas, we call them in the US, they're often called quick wins. So the idea that we can placate the leadership or the client with some short-term ideas or innovations or insights that they can see immediate results, and that's important. And it is, I love the idea of it being a balancing act, because it in fact is. When we work with clients, let's say, just as an example, I'm working with a client and I'm developing scenarios with them. And the scenarios, just for argument's sake, are set in the year 2030. This is an important concept, because I think far too often we think of that exercise of working on the future or creating scenarios as almost a time capsule. I'm going to create these scenarios and I'm going to put them in a time capsule, maybe also known as a binder, a 3-ring binder, and I'm going to put those ideas, once they're completed, on a shelf, and I'm going to come back in the year 2030 and see if I'm right. That sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, that would be a completely useless piece of work. Yet that's how many approach these efforts. They think it's isolated. They think that somehow it's a wait and see. We're going to spend some time thinking about the future, and then we're going to go back to the real world and the real work. And that's a really big fallacy. In fact, the work that we do on future worlds and foresight is directly related to the action we're going to take right now. So as an example, with scenarios or with any work that you do, it allows you to pressure test your existing strategies. So that's a very, very powerful quick win. You can work with the group over really just an afternoon exploring the future, and then come back to their current strategy that they have set and ask them, not you, but ask them to evaluate whether that strategy would be effective in these future environments that you've begun to discuss. And in many cases, they're already going to be self-aware enough to know, wow, this strategy is going to be in trouble if these trends play out the way that we think that they might, if these patterns emerge the way that they might, or these value shifts continue. And so you always want to bring it back to today, but in reality, that's the purpose of the work, is to inform today. It's not to exist separate from the day-to-day operations. The last thing I'll say on this topic really quickly is that although strategic foresight and futures thinking is a discipline, it's a field of study. You can get your master's degree in strategic foresight. My business partner earned his master's degree, and it's a field that's been around for more than 40 years. Ultimately, it is all those things, and it's a set of tools, but ultimately it's a mindset. And if you can equip your leaders with this mindset, then it does impact every decision they make every day, and they will begin to see the difference right away if you do this the right way. So I would, to recap, I would ensure that any effort that I do includes the current decision making that leadership is facing as part of the work, and that I continue to focus on the fact that this isn't an effort to create a time capsule to bury to see if we're right in 15 years. This is work to help influence the decisions we're making right now, and it's a mindset shift.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Next question for you. How do you work with the silos of IT data system owners to change their minds and collaborate?
That is a tough question.
I think that's a good one, right? Because
yeah,
these guys
it's really
are
good.
pretty powerful usually in the company.
Yes, no, it is true. It's difficult. You know, our tendency, whether it's in IT or systems or really any group, is to try to protect our turf or our field of experience. And so what I would suggest, whether it's IT or systems, is to engage them in the process. Engage them in creating the future that's going to be inclusive of those systems and that insights. You absolutely need those groups. Leveraging that, the power of systems and information technology and data analysis is going to be critical. So it's much easier to bring those stakeholders along than try to inform them at the end that this is what they need to do to change to keep up. No one likes to be informed in that way. Everyone ultimately wants to be brought along in the journey. And so that's what I would ask that you do. I would ask that you democratize this idea of long-term thinking, engage as many diverse partners as you can throughout the process so that they have ownership in the outcome and ultimately influence, because they have subject matter expertise. Now, let me just say quickly that they're going to suffer from what we all suffer from. It's this concept called educated incapacity. Educated incapacity is knowing so much about what you know that you are the last to know that things are changing. We all have this, we all suffer from this. The more experience and education we have in a field, the more likely we are to be educated, to have education incapacity. So what that means is that, again, it's those biases and assumptions that Google has studied. Our tendency is to evaluate a new piece of information based on what we already know to be true. If it agrees with what we already know to be true, we readily accept that piece of information. If it's at odds with what we already know to be true, we dismiss that information. That happens unconsciously and automatically. So the way to solve that issue is to include a diverse group of people from different backgrounds. Foresight is not an individual, but a team sport. A second way to get over-educated into capacity is to scan broadly, scan across social, technological, economic, environmental, and political, and challenge one another in terms of what is actually occurring. So that would be my recommendation, whether it's IT or systems or any group that you're trying to bring it along that might not agree with your findings.
Okay, thank you. Could you move 3 slides back? So this was a slide. Stop, this one. There was a question about that. Amongst the 3 methods, topography, crop diversity, and soil testing, is there a favorite method used to different industry, i.e. energy, etc.?
Yeah, I think if I understand the question, you know, there are industries that by their nature must have a more long-term perspective. Energy would definitely be one of these industries. Now, I would argue that every field in the environment we're in has to have a long-term and a broad perspective. So when we look at these 3 methodologies, soil testing, crop diversity, and topography, that analogy, it's not that we necessarily pick favorites. It's that all of them are used in tandem. And we're exploring those external driving forces while also recognizing those signals of change and those emerging trends. One of the reasons why I enjoy working with market and competitive intelligence professionals is that they fully understand trends, consumer insights, behavior, and of course the signals of change. And it's in many cases just a matter of not helping them learn about the external driving forces, because of course they know about that, but helping to establish the business case of why the topography level is important. I think it's less about prioritizing amongst these 3, and it's more about recognizing that we tend to focus solely on soil testing and crop diversity, and the topography is usually an afterthought. Secondly, we tend to go in order: soil testing, then crop diversity, then topography, and that's dangerous. This is why I said on this slide, one of these, to work from the outside in. And what I mean by that is you begin at the external driving forces and then work your way into industry and signals of change and then trends. It might seem like a minor difference. However, this is another way that we can prevent ourselves from falling into educated incapacity. When we go from trends and consumer insights, from what's keeping us up at night, to our competitors, to then the external environment, we tend to filter those external driving forces based on what we know today. And that may not be true in even 3 or 5 years. What we know today may no longer be valid. Our competitors today are not going to be likely the competitors we face in 3 to 5 years. The new competitors, the new opportunities are going to come from that topography space. So we need to flip the order and broaden our perspective initially, and only then do we begin to narrow our perspective as we go further in from industry to then trends.
All right. We have some 5 minutes left. So here's the last question for you. How do you work with millennials, i.e. the Generation Y, about pace of an enterprise transformation?
I'm not a millennial, but I feel like I can identify with this frustration.
Well, that's your piece, I guess.
So, and I'm going to be really candid with the audience in that I mentioned that I worked for Disney, and towards the end of my tenure, I was asked to focus on a new effort, focused on the future of work, and this is where I discovered Strategic Foresight. And so obviously I'm not directly working for Disney anymore, and there's many reasons for that. And we have an incredible relationship with Disney that continues. But if I'm going to be quite honest, one of the reasons why I decided to leave Disney is because many of my foresight efforts, specifically in the division that I was in, which was parks and resorts, the most conservative division, those ideas that I was providing weren't getting traction within the organization. They were being stopped by the culture, and I was a team of one. And was really getting frustrated. So the happily ever after of that story, as many Disney stories have, is that having the Disney perspective but working from the outside with some incredible Disney employees has propelled the work further. Further than ever possible if I had stayed in the company. So that's not a good answer to your question. I'm just acknowledging that I recognize the frustration. Here's what I would say to a millennial, to anyone that might be frustrated by the pace of or the lack of quickness of change of our organizational or corporate partners. One, start with yourself. Put the oxygen mask on yourself. These skills are incredibly important from an organizational context, but these same skills and mindset are also applicable to your personal journey, to your career development. They're going to help you to make better decisions for you as an individual and then ultimately for the organization. So be selfish and recognize that you're developing skills within yourself that you can use within this organization or in future opportunities and further into your career. Secondly, I would look at what your sphere of influence is. If you're new to the organization, you might not have a significant sphere of influence, but you have people in your department. Begin by starting the conversation about trends and emerging issues. Start with a smaller project that may not seem to be, very impactful, but if you can influence those smaller projects with foresight and some of this thinking, you'll begin to gain traction. And then don't just look within your company. Look outside. Remember, starting with the topography. Look at your network outside your work environment and help influence change in other ways. That might help the frustration level if you're able to drive change in your community or across society while your organization is catching up with the change around you. So those, in a really quick sense, are my quick advice for someone who's facing frustration at an organization. If anyone has additional questions, of course, you can contact me via email, or Twitter. I think my Twitter is all the way at the end here. And I'm happy to send out these slides as well. And here's my LinkedIn as well. I'm happy to keep in contact. And please don't forget that I'll be at the conference later this year, so please join us and Rainer and the rest of the group, because it's going to be a fantastic conference.
Not over yet.
Oh, okay.
So there's a last question coming up, so we should really try to answer that.
Yes,
is there any literature you would recommend?
Absolutely. And if you'd like to contact me via LinkedIn or Twitter, or through the webinar through ICI, I'm happy to provide it. We have some resources and additional readings. We've developed our own primer or introduction to Strategic Foresight, which has its own references and resources that I'm happy to share as well in a PDF format. That's a really easy read that I'm happy to share.
Right. Okay, now we can go to the final slide. I think we're already done. No, one more, please.
Okay,
well, this is ICI's workshop coming up. That's US, so Chicago. If you have nothing.
It's funny, I'm going to be in Chicago in a couple of days, so I'm really excited.
Oh, yeah. But the next slide is about the conference, and this is exactly the place where you will meet. Whoops, so there's no next slide?
No, this is it. This is what I had. Sorry.
It was a bit of confusion then. Yes. So, no, we can May
at the bottom,
Amsterdam.
It says the May 9th through 12th at the end.
One slide got deleted. Yes. And this is exactly where Yvette will be, and many other practitioners, academics, and of course, educators in CI. So if you're interested, we're talking about our main conference topic is about learning from other disciplines, as in what's in for us competitive and market intelligence professionals. And of course, you're unique, but let's face it, there are more guys like you around, and there are more forward-thinking people, thought-provoking, providing a lot of input to you, and with many formats for people simply to exchange and learn from each other, and that's usually very good atmosphere. So I'm looking forward to anybody who wants to come along. Let's meet again in Amsterdam, or as I indicated already, the 28th of March, there's another webinar from this series coming up, then tackling more the hardcore scenario, quantitative as well as qualitative methodologies. So definitely different from today's, but as exciting, hopefully, and as illustrative as your webinar for today. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and thanks a lot, Yvette, for your wonderful presentation. Really enjoyed that. And let's see you next time around. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.